let's talk about microinverters and where they should be used and where they shouldn't be used. So, um, solar panels make DC power, and in order to get it into something that we can use in our outlets, we have to switch it to AC power. So, in the dawn of solar, we started with string inverters. And a string inverter basically takes a whole bunch of solar panels in a row and strings them together into one Christmas tree light, as some people will call it, and put it back into the inverter. And then the inverter changes that power from DC to AC when we can use it. A microinverter is typically installed underneath your solar panels on your roof. The solar panels, between 1 and 4 solar panels now, can be plugged into the microinverter. The microinverter changes that power to 240 volts AC, which we can feed directly into the panel. So then we're bringing AC power off the roof down into the electrical panel where we can use it. Why are we using, where would we use a microinverter? So I typically don't recommend microinverters because I believe that in the near future we're going to be incentivized to start using batteries in our homes. And that would be, from a utilities point of view, why it makes sense for us to batteries in our homes, because we can mitigate the demand that it puts on the grid at certain times. It's also because we're going to be having time of use electricity usage. So electricity is going to be more expensive at night, cheaper in the day. A battery will make sense because we can store our energy in the daytime and use it at nighttime when it's cheaper. So in places like California, it's 10 cents a kilowatt hour in the daytime, and it's 90 cents US dollars at night. You can put a battery in those places without solar, and it'll pay for itself quite quickly. Lithium iron phosphate batteries is what the industry's been switching to and using as a go-to, and they have dropped probably 70% in the last 2-3 years as far as price points go. The standards have been changing as well. There's new rules for batteries and whatnot, and it's all kind of moving towards lithium iron phosphate. Okay, why does that matter? Well, I'll tell you why it matters. Certain places like Nova Scotia are actually buying battery or demand power when they need it, so that the utility says, hey, we need electricity, we need it now, can somebody supply it to us? The customers who have batteries who can supply energy at certain times are given like a significant premium on this electricity, because it actually helps the grid. It saves them from putting in generators that might sit in standby. And by generator, it can be anything. It could be nuclear, diesel, it can be all kinds of different things that will supply this at these times. So anyway, it's going to make sense to have batteries in the future. So I'm kind of designing systems. I don't want to switch a customer to AC power if I think there's going to be a battery in the future. So microinverters are up in the elements. I've seen more microinverter failures out of all of the inverters that we can use. They fail the most. They're in the elements. They're another point of failure. They are underneath the solar panel, which could be in the middle of a stack of 3 high, third row in. Like it's greasy to try to get to if we have to replace it, and hope that you mapped it correctly. Then we're running AC power off the roof at 240 volts. So the higher the voltage we can run, the smaller the wire we can get away with. On a DC string inverted system, we can run up to 600 volts off the roof, which means smaller wire size, more efficient, and we have DC power coming down to the ground. Why is it important to have DC power on the ground versus AC power? If we're going to put a battery in, the microinverter systems, which do offer battery solutions, what they'll do is they'll convert their power from DC to AC on the roof. You're losing 2-3% best case scenario at peak. You're bringing it down onto the ground. You're then converting it from AC back to DC into their AC battery. All batteries are DC powered, direct current. So they call it an AC battery, but what it is, it's it's a battery with an inverter on it. So they're converting it back so we can store it. we're losing 2 to 3% at best. And then if you want to use it again, it goes through an inverter again, and you're converting it from DC power back to AC power that you can use. So now we've got 3 conversions. We're losing 10%, and we've got a lot more points of failure. I like to use string inverters, especially on places where we have one roof surface or a ground mount. We don't. The advantage of microinverters is if partial panels are shaded. If you have a string of 10 panels in a row and you shade one of them, you don't just lose 10%. You lose maybe 40% on a string inverter. However, if you have no shading at all and you put microinverters there, you've added points of failure, you're switching it to AC, and it's really not cool if you're going to put a battery there in the future. So I hope I'm making sense. So if I had a ground mount system, I would spec a string inverter, which I almost do on most of my projects. The string inverter, I can run high voltage from the solar panels to the inverter, and then if it's a hybrid inverter, I can put my battery right there. So I'm not converting to AC before I store the electricity. The inverter will then convert it to AC when I need to use it. So the competitors who only use microinverters would argue that, if a solar panel goes out, then you'll lose that whole string just like Christmas lights. They're absolutely true. If you unplug one solar panel, you lose the whole string. I've installed probably 10,000 solar panels now, and the number of solar panels I've actually seen go bad in the wild is exactly 0. I've never seen one go bad in the wild. I've dropped them, we've sat on them, broke them, and all during installation. But once they're installed, I've not seen one go bad, stop working. So that's a non-issue for me. The string inverters are more affordable. We actually have another reason when microinverters first came out to use them was because each panel typically would have an inverter on the back of it, and if you had 10 panels and you shaded one panel, you would only lose 10% if you completely covered that panel. So it has that advantage versus a string inverter. So we would use microinverters on homes we knew we weren't going to have a battery, and if we had, say, 3 different roof surfaces or 4, or we knew there's going to be some shading from a dormer or like a hip roof, if we wanted to use east, west, and south on a hip roof, we could do those 3 different roofs separately. But now the string inverters have gotten so good, we actually can have up to 4 channels, 4 different, so we can essentially run 3 or 4 different surfaces, and if we knew one surface was going to produce more or less than another one, we can separate that on a string inverter. We're still using DC power, we're still keeping that high voltage and smaller wire off the roof, and we're bringing that down to the inverter on 4 different channels. So we can do if you have 2 inverters, sometimes we can only go up to a 10 kilowatt typically. I shouldn't say that. You can go up to a 15 kilowatt on a single phase inverter. So if you had more than, say, if you were doing a big system like a 30 kilowatt, you need multiple inverters. And then you could have up to 8 channels. So I can do 8 separate sections of panels and have them independently allocating their power or producing their power, and you could shade one on one channel and it wouldn't affect the other 3. So it's gotten a lot better that way. So microinverters, a lot of points of failure, typically going to cost you a little more money. You can monitor your power at the level of the panel with a microinverter if you have 1 per, which is cool, but it's cool for like a couple weeks and then you just don't look at it anymore. And I'm a guy that likes data. So do I do microinverter systems? Absolutely. I will do microinverter systems. They do have their place if you know there's never going to be a battery and if you got a chopped up roof. If somebody wants me to put microinverters on a ground mount system, I'm like, it's just not worth the squeeze for that. I guess, we will if we have to. A string inverter will work as good in that case. typically on a ground mount system, we're going to have a longer run to get back to the house. So depending on where we put the inverter, if we put the inverter on the house, we can run higher voltage and get away with a smaller line and even less line loss going through there. So let's talk about DC optimizers for a second. So a DC optimizer doesn't convert to AC. So if I'm on a roof and I want to keep, and if it's got a lot of different places, like a lot of different roof pitches and say some dormers or maybe some shading from a chimney pipe or something, I could do a string inverter, and then I can add DC optimizers, which are just modules that go on the back side of a panel, and they'll actually produce a little bit more power and give you per panel monitoring, and you'll have the advantage where if you shade 1 out of the 10 in the string, you only lose that one. They're about $80 to add a DC optimizer to a system. It's another point of failure. I have used them, lots of them in the past, yeah. So there's those, and they're not converting to AC on the roof, so you're not doing your conversion. So, which is great, but the failure rate on those is higher, you know, than not having them there, of course. And then, anyways, there's some companies out there, Solar's one of them. They will spec DC optimizers on everything. If you have a house in the middle of a field or a ground mount in the middle of a field and you put DC optimizers on those, guess what? It will produce more power. However, if you do the math on it, it's about an 80-year payback, and it's just not worth it. And what they're doing is it's just an upsell, or they insist that, you know, you need to have them. I won't do that to customers. I will lay it out, and, you know, unless you're 5 years old and you think you've got 85 years left to pay for these things and they're not going to fail, then yeah, go for it. Or if you're just really data geeky, go for it. I will use them in places where I know there's going to be shading. But in a ground mount situation or a place where I just know there's not going to be any shading and those panels are going to get pretty much the same sun all day long, they're not worth having. So yes, anyway, I hope that makes sense for you guys who are talking about microinverters versus string inverters. And you know, there's companies out there that they'll crap on string inverters, and I kind of don't agree with that. The string inverters with the multiple channels have come quite a long ways, and the hybrid inverters that will take a battery, I think, are going to be mainstream in the future with less conversions, less AC to DC conversions. I really don't think we should be bringing AC off the roof. If you do a standard system, a standard grid tied system where there's no battery or anything, and I just have no electronics or any points of failure on the roof, I can bring that power down to the ground. And if you decide you want to add a battery later, I have to do, I've got my DC power right there. I just take your inverter, we switch your inverter out for one with a battery in the future, which may or may not be subsidized by utility. I do believe that's coming. And then we've got DC power right there. We don't have to worry about converting it or changing anything on the roof. And we've got, you know, good high voltage DC power to work with to add a battery to. So anyways, I hope that makes sense to you guys. I love doing these videos and kind of talking about how things are going and battery tech and all that. And I know it's going to be confusing to some customers, and it might be irrelevant to what, but some of us are kind of geeky and want to get into it. Anyways, that's my take on it, and I'm sure this will generate some comments. So thanks for watching.